So I previously stated in a video that I haven't watched mainstream news media since the day after the debate, but so many people are down in my comment section talking about Lawrence O'Donnell and how he addressed this situation. I went out onto YouTube to find what he had to say about it. Here's what Lawrence O'Donnell had to say.
Got this letter, and if you saw any of the White House press briefing today, it was the White House press corps, many of them, at their absolute worst in the way they approached Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, who was trying to be responsive to medical questions where there were limitations on what she could say. The New York Times reporting of the way the press secretary handled that was to say that she dodged the questions. That is not true. The New York Times is wrong about that. She responded to every one of the questions. She didn't answer the questions with the name that they were asking for of a particular doctor. She didn't give the answer the New York Times wanted or other reporters wanted, but she did, in fact, answer every single time. The reporters kept banging on about a New York Times report today that indicated that a neurologist had visited the White House 8 times in the last year. Here is the full explanation of how that has nothing to do with President Biden and President Biden's health, and that the kind of out-of-control behavior by the White House, most of the White House press corps, not all, most of the White House press corps today, was as bad a circus as it looked like. The president's physician, Kevin O'Connor, has publicly released a memo that is directed to Karine Jean-Pierre, basically in response to what she had to go through today in the White House press briefing. And it explains in more detail something that Karine Jean-Pierre explained today, which is that the White House medical unit does not treat just the president. Many, many White House staffers are treated by the White House medical unit, some cabinet members, and over 1,000 members of the military are serviced in the White House by the White House medical unit. Over 1,000 members of the military who serve nearby and in the White House. And so Dr. O'Connor reveals today that in this memo, many military personnel experience neurological issues related to their service. And Dr. Kennard regularly visits the White House medical unit as part of this general neurology practice. The White House physician had already reported that in President Biden's annual physical, he is examined by a neurologist. That's once a year, not 8 times a year, once a year. And that neurologist is that same neurologist, Kevin Kennard. And so elsewhere in the memo, it says Dr. Kennard was the neurological specialist that examined President Biden for each of his annual physicals. His findings have been made public each time I have released the results of the president's annual physical. President Biden has not seen a neurologist outside of his annual physical. And so the White House press corps that wanted to know, wanted the White House today to confirm that this neurologist had visited the White House 8 times. And that's information that is only available to the press corps because the Biden White House reveals the records of every visitor of the White House. How many times did a neurologist visit the Trump White House? The White House press corps has no idea and will never know because the Trump White House never, ever released the White House visitor logs. How many cardiologists visited the White House during Donald Trump's time there? We have no idea because the Trump White House hid all of that information. The only reason the New York Times knows that this doctor was in the White House logs is because the the White House, the Biden White House, unlike the Trump White House, makes that information public. The memo goes on to say the results of this year's physical exam by President Biden were detailed in my February 28th letter. And it said this on February 28th about President Biden's physical exam. It says an extremely detailed neurological exam was again reassuring in that there were no findings which would be consistent with any cerebellar or other central neurological disorders such as stroke, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, or ascending lateral sclerosis. Nor are there any signs of cervical myelopathy. This exam did again support a finding of peripheral neuropathy in both feet. No motor weakness was detected. He exhibits no tremor, either at rest or with activity. He demonstrates excellent fine motor dexterity, but a subtle difference in heat-cold sensation could be elicited as it was last year. This heat-cold sensation deficit was detected a couple of inches higher on his ankle calf this year, which is not unexpected. There may, in fact, be day-to-day subjective variation of these findings as during last year's exam. This area of sensation deficit was actually found to be smaller than the year before. This information that I just read has been public since February 28th. Absolutely no neurological issues whatsoever in the president's physical exam. And now we know that the neurologist who conducted the neurology part of that annual exam was Dr. Kennard, who has, for other purposes, for completely different purposes, visited the White House 8 times, according to the White House visitor logs that are available to the press only because the Biden White House allows those to be made public after the Trump White House banned those from ever being seen by anyone. That's one of the big differences between the presidency of Donald Trump and Joe Biden. One of the smaller differences, one of the least dangerous differences between them, although it is extremely risky, especially in Trump world, not to have any record, no idea who has actually visited the White House. That could actually be a very risky proposition for this country to be living with, a White House where you have no idea who's going in and out. We have other issues to talk about tonight, and we will. But this breaking news about what the New York Times thought today was its giant scandalous scoop that a neurologist had visited the White House 8 times, and that the White House press corps treated as the most important news to hit that room in, I don't know, as long as there has been a Biden presidency, that's for sure. The grotesque behavioral overreaction by the White House press corps today, most, not all, of the White House press corps, was on display on video. It has now been answered in full and completely by Dr. O'Connor, President Biden's physician in the White House. So that controversy's done.
Here's page 1 of the memo, and here's page 2 of the memo. I agree with Lawrence O'Donnell when he says that the overreaction by news media over this bit of information is grotesque. And the overreaction by fellow content creators on social media is equally as grotesque.